It's the people you thought you knew, like you've never seen them before. The romance.
He was a marvelous kisser. Elvis had real soft, full lips.
The intensity.
He was very jealous, very possessive. He wanted me right next to him at all times.
The heartbreak.
Kept saying, you got to come home with me, I got a surprise for you. And I said, I can't go with you, I'm engaged to be married.
Elvis and June, next on Biography.
When I first met Elvis was in the 8th grade. It was Christmas time, and he asked the teacher, the music teacher, if he could bring his guitar to class and sing, and she said, sure. He got up and sang, and I couldn't believe it because that wasn't the thing to do at that time. In high school, Elvis was kind of a shy guy, but the thing that really made Elvis stand out is the way he dressed.
His pants and his jackets, they're all kinds of different colors.
It was either black pants with white strap,
Or maybe a black pair of pants with a pink stripe down the side,
or pink slacks with black.
a sport coat with maybe trimmed in white with the collar turned up.
For sure, he had on a kind of see-through lace shirt with his hair all slicked back, you know.
You couldn't miss him.
Well, on the streets, out in public, I like real conservative clothes. Something that's not too flashy. But on stage, I like them as flashy as you can get them. Because on stage, your clothes play a very important part.
He was out front, in front of the stage where all the chaos was. Elvis would create it by his movements on stage and his interplay with the audience and all.
The year was 1955, and a 20-year-old singer named Elvis Presley was red hot in the Deep South. Elvis and his backup band played countless one-nighters, promoting their regional hits in places like Abilene, Texas, Leechville, Arkansas, and the Shreveport, Louisiana hayride.
They were splitting the money. Scotty, Bill, and Elvis. He was getting 50, and they were splitting 50, which was 25 apiece. They were booking like $100 a day, $150 a day. Well, then they had to pay me and the car expenses and the hotels and all that out of theirs. And we were driving all over to get that little old money.
It's good. The people like it. As far as rock and roll goes, I really like it. I enjoy doing it. And the people that really accepted it, great, and it just makes me want to knock myself out to keep giving them something to enjoy.
On June 27th, Elvis arrived in the Gulf Coast city of Biloxi, Mississippi for 3 performances. In the audience the first night was 17-year-old Glenda Manduffy. The next day, Glenda called her best friend June Juanico. Glenda was going to see Elvis again, and she wanted June to come with her.
I didn't even know who Elvis Presley was. And she called me and he was appearing at the Airmen's Club at Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi. So she called. I already had a date. She said, I'll help cancel your date. He was just the best looking thing I had ever seen in my life. He really was. And so he took a break from playing. He only knew about, 7 or 8 songs. Glenda, my girlfriend, said, let's go over and talk to him. And I said, no, you can go over and talk to him if you want to, Glenda. I'm not going to go talk to him. And she says, well, let's go to the ladies' room. And so we had to pass right by Elvis. And she said, on the way back, let's stop and talk to him. And I don't know why I was playing hard to get or whatever, because we had made eye contact a few times while he was singing. And as we were passing by, he reached through the crowd and grabbed me by the arm. And he said, where are you going? You're not leaving, are you? And I said, no, I'm going back to my table. And I was really nervous then. He said, well, when I get through playing, how about you stick around for a little while and show me the town? And I said, Biloxi's a real small town. There's nothing to see in Biloxi.
June returned home at dawn after a night of kissing and talking with Elvis. She had never been out that late before. As she fell asleep, June wondered if she'd ever see Elvis Presley again. In May 1956, June worked as a car hop and in a beauty salon. Her one night with Elvis was just a faded memory. She couldn't miss the fact, however, that the handsome singer she met at the air base just a year before had become quite famous. He had the #1 record in the country and best-selling album. He had already made several network television appearances and even landed a movie deal. June and her friend Marie were on the way to Memphis for a vacation with 3 other girlfriends. When they arrived, Marie's first priority, to find Elvis's new house.
I wanted to go to Florida, she wanted to go to Memphis. I didn't really know that the reason she wanted to go to Memphis was because Elvis lived in Memphis. So as soon as we got to Memphis, we went to down in the area where Elvis used to buy his clothes at Lansky Brothers, I think is the name of the store. And Marie asked one of the salesmen there what was Elvis's address. He gave her directions and he said, I'm sure Elvis wouldn't mind you going by to see his house because he's not in town.
Elvis had recently moved himself and his parents into their first real home in a middle-class Memphis neighborhood.
So we drove over to Audubon Drive, parked out in the front, and there was heavy-duty construction equipment parked in the backyard. And we figured he was having a pool put in, and we're still sitting in Marie's car. There's 5 of us girls that went. And we're debating on what kind of swimming pool he's going to have put in. Guitar-shaped, whatever, you know. So I said, well, I'm going to go take a look. So I got out, the rest of the girls followed, and we're up just, you know, bigger than life, trespassing on Elvis's property. And I jumped up and was looking over the fence top like this, you know, looking at the pool. And it's a square pool. And the pink Cadillac drives in the driveway. And it was Elvis and his mother and father. Elvis's cousin had drowned, and Elvis was called home for the funeral. And he walks straight up to the fence and picks me up by the waist and puts me on the ground. He said, what are you doing here, June? And I said, I'm on vacation with the girls, you know. And he had tried to call me when he came back to Biloxi, and I was never home. He wanted to know where we were going and did we have any plans, and we told him that we were going to see a movie that night. And my friend had a hot pink Ford Fairlane car. You couldn't miss it. He found the hot pink car parked at the theater and came on in and sat next to me and held my hand throughout the movie. And I thought that was really sweet, you know.
June says Elvis asked her to go for a motorcycle ride the next morning.
My first motorcycle ride with Elvis was on Mud Island. And he took me there so he could open up the bike. He said, pull your hat down real tight so it don't blow off, and we were just really moving out. And I was just beside myself with excitement, more so than fear. And when we stopped, he was breathing heavy with fear, as opposed to excitement, you know. When I think about it now, that was an insane thing to do, just totally insane.
June saw Elvis every day that week. They quickly discovered that they loved each other's company. At the fairgrounds, Elvis won a giant panda bear for June, which she promptly names Pelvis. Elvis showed her around Memphis. June recalls a swing past Sun Records, the Memphis courts where his family once lived, and Humes High. They also visited Dewey Phillips, the first DJ to play Elvis on the radio. Elvis brought June home to meet his parents. They listened to blues records. Gladys Presley showed June how her son liked his fried chicken prepared. Then, June says, Elvis received a long-distance phone call and asked her if she'd like to fly to Houston with him to pick up his new Cadillac. Gladys asked June how old she was. Mrs. Presley did not want her son traveling with an underage girl. 18, June replied. The flight to Houston was June's first plane ride and her first night away from home with a boyfriend. Although booked in separate hotel rooms, June says they slept in each other's arms.
There was something about being with Elvis, I just trusted him that he would never do anything to hurt me or anything.
The next day, Elvis and June drove the new Eldorado back to Memphis, top down.
After 7 days of being in Memphis, we drove back to Biloxi. The city of Biloxi knew that I had this long date in Memphis with Elvis. The daily newspaper, the Daily Herald, did an interview with me after we went to Memphis. Total strangers wanted to rip my eyes out. You know, you think you're really something, and you're not. you know, you're trash and all this kind of stuff. But you just overlook stuff like that. Elvis said that he had a vacation coming up and he was going to come and spend it in Biloxi. And so sure enough, the first part of June, Elvis arrived in Biloxi. We had stayed in touch by phone, and I didn't really know when he was coming in. And he told my mother, he said, well, tell June I'm sorry I missed her, but I'm on my way to Florida where I can get some peace and quiet. So me and my girlfriend jumped in her car, parked on a hillside that we could see all the traffic leaving Biloxi, so I could stop him. We sat there for a good 2 hours, no sign of Elvis. So when I get back home again, my mother is just frantic. She said, Elvis has called here half a dozen times, wanting to know where you are. And I said, well, I've been trying to stop him from leaving town.
In the summer of '56, Elvis vacationed in Mississippi, but told the press that he was headed to Florida. He had a girl in Biloxi, June Juanico. Even with the ruse, Elvis couldn't shake fans or reporters. Elvis and June were reunited at Coco's restaurant. Over dinner, Elvis related his dilemma to Eddie Bellman, the boyfriend of June's mother.
Well, when I first met him, he had to leave the motel down here in Biloxi because of the fact that people found out he was there, and they kept coming by and banging on his door and everything.
He was registered at the Sun and Sand Hotel under the name of Arthur Hooten, one of his buddies' names. That's a real name, Arthur Hooten.
Elvis rarely traveled alone. He had come to Biloxi with Arthur, whose mother once worked with Elvis's mom. Red West, who it was said became Elvis's friend because he once stopped high school football players from giving Elvis a haircut in the locker room. And Elvis's cousin Gene Smith, who just seemed to be wherever Elvis was.
So I said, Elvis, I got a couple of houses, and I said, I can let you have one of them. If you and your friends want to stay there, you can come to the house and stay. I said, it's already furnished and all. And he said, I think that would be nice. And I took him in my car so people wouldn't recognize that Cadillac of his.
Meanwhile, the press and the general public and everyone had figured out that he was there.
The first thing you know, the crowd was all around the house, aggravating him. Come on out, Elvis, and give us your signature. Come on out and sing for us.
He had no privacy there.
He was trying to get a little rest and take a nap, and he just couldn't. So he said, Eddie, he said, I guess I'm going to have to go somewhere else.
He rented a family-owned house, the Hack, H-A-C-K. So he leased the house for the summer, the Hack House.
The luxury home was located a few miles outside of Biloxi in an upscale resort complex known as the Gulf Hills Dude Ranch.
The reason Elvis had so much privacy in Gulf Hills was because it was so easy to get lost, and his house was out of the way. And that's where we would come and go from. Well, the rest of June and July. The most asked question that I've ever been asked was Elvis a good kisser? And the second most asked question was, did you go to bed with him?
On July 1st, 1956, Elvis appeared live on The Steve Allen Show. On the 4th, his concert in Memphis drew 13,000. The following Monday, Elvis was back in Biloxi and looked forward to spending a 3-week vacation with June. At Gulf Hills, Elvis and his entourage were away from fans and the press. June asked her friends Pat and Buddy, both crazy about Elvis, to join the group. In the evening, they all sang songs in the hotel lounge. They smoked tiny cigars and used them to set off fireworks at the resort's golf course. This resulted in a polite letter from the hotel manager, who pointed out that it would be safer to explode fireworks on the beach. Despite Elvis and June's seclusion at Gulf Hills, the word got out. Newspapers and magazines from all over the country were calling for an interview with Elvis's teenage girlfriend.
The most asked question that I've ever been asked was Elvis a good kisser? And the second most asked question was, did you go to bed with him? I didn't answer that one.
When a New Orleans radio station broadcast news of Elvis's engagement to June, Elvis feared his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, might hear the story.
The colonel would always kind of say, Elvis, you know, be careful because, you know, those girls may drop you if you get involved or you get married or something.
Elvis accepted Colonel's advice, which was very wise of Elvis. Colonel Parker really created Elvis. When you say what was his role was to create an Elvis Presley.
Elvis and June raced 90 miles to the Louisiana radio station. He told listeners he was serious about his career and not about to wed.
When I'm going to approach with the question of when you do get married, what kind of a girl do you want? A blonde, a brunette, or a redhead? I haven't got a dream girl in my mind right now, you know.
Although Elvis played it cool, June's mother still had a good feeling about the young star.
I liked him right off the start. I liked Elvis because he wasn't loud. He didn't use any foul language, and he was just a fine, well-cut man.
June's mother's boyfriend, Eddie Bellman, felt the same way.
Eddie had not really kept up with Elvis's career or anything like that. He liked him as a young man because he respected his mother and father. Everything he said was yes, sir, and no, ma'am, and thank you, and please. And he was just a real Southern gentleman. And Eddie admired that, so he thought he would arrange a deep-sea fishing trip. He had a friend that had a charter boat.
That was the first trip he'd ever been on as far as deep-sea fishing or any kind of fishing. So Elvis enjoyed it so much. On the way back to Biloxi, Elvis asked if I could arrange to get the boat again because he wanted to invite his mother and father down to go with us.
He called them long distance. We were all in the room with him. And he said, I want y'all to come down Saturday morning and go fishing.
His mother and father came down the next day and I met him.
We met the mother and the daddy, Mr. and Miss Presley, on a Friday night, and they didn't know how to get to Gulf Hills. So I said, I'm June's mother, this is Mr. Bellman, and y'all follow us and we'll take you to Elvis. Who else has a pink Cadillac but the Presleys?
On Friday the 13th, RCA released Hound Dog and Don't Be Cruel. By the end of Elvis's summer vacation in Biloxi, the record would sell 1 million copies.
The following day, we went fishing again. And his mother and father fished, Elvis fished, all his friends fished, June fished, everybody fished. I didn't fish, I was busy taking film, taking footage with my little 8mm camera. I asked Elvis, would he mind? He said, no, you take all you want.
Elvis was reeling in sharks and everything else, you know, and it was something new to him.
We just killed the fish that day, just had them strung up like you just wouldn't believe. I think Mrs. Presley brought a jar of peanut butter. She brought bananas too. Somehow during the day she managed to make him a peanut butter and banana sandwich, which we all came to call an Elvis Presley sandwich.
His mother was looking after Elvis like he was a young child, and she kept bringing him peanut butter sandwiches while he was fishing. And she was handing it to him and feeding him while he was fishing, and that's a fact. It's on the film, all that's on the film.
Before he started eating, she was holding it for him to take bites. Evidently, she wasn't feeding him fast enough or something, so he took it and was eating it. Fishy hands and everything.
I brought a bunch of German officers' caps back from Germany with me during World War II, and I gave them to Elvis and all his friends.
And Eddie, knowing that we should have had hats on to be out in the hot sun that length of time, brought those hats for us to put on to fish to keep the sun out of our faces.
They put on the caps and they started singing on the boat here. I think they sang Hound Dog and Don't Be Cruel, and that's two I remember.
That stick is a boom on top of the boat, and it looked like a giant microphone. He was just standing up there and he saw this big thing, and he went behind it and started pretending he was singing into this tall microphone. And it wasn't, it was just the boom on the boat. It was funny. Elvis was funny.
Elvis and June didn't seem to mind the lack of privacy. June wondered, could life get any better?
before we got back into Biloxi, a boat approaches us, and we're on our way in. So our captain slows for this boat to come alongside, and 2 reporters jump on the boat. So this kind of ticked Elvis off pretty good. So in the film footage, you will see that Elvis is sitting up on the bow of the boat. I reach over and adjust his belt because his name is crooked on it. But the reason we were up on the front of the boat is because Elvis had put a friend here on this walkway area, another friend on this walkway area, to block the reporters from getting to him.
As the boat neared land, hundreds of fans and press were waiting at the marina. The captain decided he better dock further down shore, but not before a photographer captured this portrait of the weary fishing party.
I asked Elvis, would he mind making a 5-minute appearance at my shoe department? I had a ladies' shoe department and a ladies' wear store. I had a leased shoe department. And he said, sure, Eddie, I'll be glad to come by. So people started pouring in down here from all directions. They had the whole police department out there directing traffic, and they had to let them in shift. And they liked to tore the man's store up, but he didn't mind that. He got so much good publicity, he didn't mind that at all. The man that owned the store that I leased the department from, he said, let's give Elvis a present. I said, that's not necessary. I said, he's doing this because I took him on a couple of fishing trips. And I said, he's not expecting it. He said, let's give him something anyway. I said, well, if you want to give him something, I said, let's give him a shotgun. So I went up to a sporting goods store. I got a 410 gauge Winchester pump. Fine little gun. And we presented that to Elvis, and boy, he was just as happy as a child eating ice cream, you know. I brought some skeet targets out to Gulf Hills, and he did pretty good. He missed a few, but he hit a little more than he missed. And he let his friends shoot and all that, and we just had a ball. Somebody brought a BB gun up there, and everybody started shooting the BB gun, and he held a cigarette paper in his hand like that to let somebody with the BB gun to shoot the paper out of his hand. He did, that's a fact. And luckily the guy didn't hit his thumb.
The days drifted by lazily at Gulf Hills. Elvis and June were happy together. They had had all the time in the world, it seemed, to be with one another. June says Elvis loved being with his small-town girl and looked for ways to show it. One day, he commissioned the famous Gulf Coast artist Harry Reeks to do a portrait of each of them.
And Elvis was not too pleased with it and said that it didn't do me justice. And Mr. Reeks, he was such a sweet gentleman, he said, well, it's hard to capture that much beauty. But Elvis patiently sat for this one for about a good 45 minutes. He had gotten in a big box of souvenirs that Colonel Parker used to peddle, and he reached in and took out this pink scarf and draped it around my neck and pretended to be strangling me with it.
With Elvis and June caught up in such simple pleasures, who would suspect Elvis Presley was on the verge of becoming the most famous entertainer in the world?
He liked fun, and he liked good times, and he liked people. He just liked to rock and roll. You know, it don't take long to get sunburned out here if you're not accustomed to it. And if you're fair-skinned like he was sort of fair-skinned. He had a shirt on and a life jacket because of that, because he had gotten sunburned.
On their Biloxi vacation, Elvis water skied while June got a skiing lesson. But Elvis became irritated when he noticed that June wasn't watching him.
He was very jealous, very possessive. He wanted me right next to him at all times. We never did really fight. Never did. And if we did have an argument or a disagreement, Elvis would take me away from the crew of friends in someplace private and apologized. The Hack House, the house that he rented for the summer, had a big front lawn that was kind of like a sloping hillside with nice clean cut grass and everything. We were laying out under the stars, and we had taken a sheet from the bed, or blanket, and laid it out, and passionate kisses. And he said, "I can't get married right away. I promised the Colonel I'd wait at least 3 years." And he said, "Will you wait 3 years for me, June?" And I said, "Sure, I'll wait."
Elvis was anxious to spend more time with his parents while on vacation. He drove them to New Orleans. June sat in the back seat with Elvis's mom.
Elvis went unrecognized. He had on a silly little hat and sunglasses, and this one little teenage girl tapped him on the shoulder, and he thought, "Oh, goodness." And he turned around and she said, "Mister, will you take a picture of us?" And the girls lined up in a line, and Elvis snapped their picture for them.
Gladys said she'd never seen Elvis taken with a girl as much as June. She kidded Elvis that he better not let Colonel Parker know just how much. Too shy to call Mrs. Presley Gladys, June called her Lovey from her middle name Love, and Gladys affectionately nicknamed June Satinin.
Mrs. Presley was admiring the houses. Mr. Presley would rather just watch where he's going than look at anything. She was saying, "Wouldn't that be wonderful to live in a place like that?" And ended up, about 6 months later, Elvis buys Graceland that looked like one of the homes on the beach, like some of those antebellum homes. We were passing the cemetery, and she said, "That's the prettiest cemetery I've ever seen in my life. Stop and take a ride around and go." This was the cemetery in Metairie. She told Elvis that she said she would like to be, not to be put in the ground. She would like to be put in a tomb like that one of these days. And he just said, "It's time to go get back in the car. We're not going to talk about this. We're not even going to be here."
Elvis loved his mother dearly. A lot of Southern guys are like that. When I first went on the road with Elvis, she would tell me, she would say, "George, now, you look after my son, and you make sure that he calls home and talks to me, and remind him to call me every night."
When he first started, it gave him tremendous pleasure to get her everything that was beautiful. He was very close and very devoted to his mother because she believed in him.
It was the most tragic thing in his life when Gladys passed away.
He wasn't the same after that.
He was upset because people were saying that he was a child of the devil. He just wanted people to like him.
In 1956, Colonel Parker booked Elvis on a 10-day Florida concert tour in early August. After that, Elvis was to begin filming his first motion picture, Love Me Tender, in Hollywood. Elvis would be clear across the country in just a few weeks, so June begged her mom to let her go on the tour. It took both Elvis and Gladys Presley to convince June's mother to say yes. The night before they left for Florida, Elvis and June stayed together until morning in Elvis's bedroom at Gulf Hills. It was not for lack of desire that June stayed a virgin.
It's funny because things were different than they are today. You know, you had people with, you know, there were only a few bad girls in the whole school, you know, if you know what I'm talking about.
According to June, Elvis was often the one to stop short of going all the way. In an era when premarital sex was less accepted, June believed that Elvis expected to marry a virgin. To make June less conspicuous to Colonel Parker on the Florida trip, June says Elvis asked her to ride with her friends Pat and Buddy, who were also invited to go along. On tour, Elvis played back-to-back concerts, all filled to standing room capacity. June, Pat, and Buddy watched Elvis from the stage wings. It was the first time June had seen Elvis perform since the night they met. June admits she was jealous when she saw thousands of screaming girls competing for Elvis's attention. When June asked how he felt about the affection of so many females, she remembers his telling her, "They don't love me, they love the idea of me." With the press and the Colonel lurking in the hotel, June returned to her room each night alone. She says Elvis would later secretly join her down the hall. Much to Colonel Parker's irritation, the press quickly figured out that June was traveling with Elvis.
I don't think it was so much that he didn't like June. He just didn't want Elvis to get involved with a lady that early in his career.
He gave me some pretty dirty looks from time to time. Colonel Parker, being the snake that he was, I just smiled.
As expected, the Colonel was furious when he saw a feature article that quoted June's mother with saying Elvis will marry June in 3 years. He demanded that Elvis do something immediately about the bad press. Elvis quickly concocted a story for the Miami Herald that he had not one, but 25 steady girlfriends. Elvis ordered June to keep her mother quiet. He later apologized, saying he felt he was losing control of his life. June wondered why Elvis wouldn't just stand up to the Colonel if he loved her so much.
He'd come to me, I mean, even early days, and say, "Colonel wants me to do this. He wants me to, I don't want so-and-so." I said, "Well, tell him." You know, I said, "Sit down and tell him. And tell him why you don't want to." "Oh, no, I made a deal with him. He's going to take care of this, and I'll take care of the singing."
Elvis was also agitated about other things.
He was upset because people were saying that he was a child of the devil, and, you know, and he was leading our children. He just wanted people to like him.
After the final show of the tour, June missed her ride and didn't get back to Elvis's hotel suite for an hour. She found him in bed, in a cold sweat, still dressed. He had had a nightmare. He says he dreamed he saw himself in a coffin, his mother standing over him crying. Elvis held June close. She feared something bad was about to happen. On August 20th, Elvis began filming his first motion picture.
Elvis would go to the movie theater when he was young, and he would study the actors, how they acted on the screen and what they wore and the looks that they used. He was looking forward to it. He loved movies.
As much as Elvis loved the cinema, Hollywood turned out to be a different place than he had expected. June says he missed her. He sent her telegrams and even invited her to California.
He was very intimidated. He was just a small-town country boy, and, you know, and Hollywood's a different city all on its own and everything, and a lot of people telling you exactly what to do, and he was so anxious to please. And Elvis's only real problem that he had out there was he wanted it to be a straight acting part with no songs. And they did come up and with one song, and he agreed that he would sing the song, but it wouldn't show him singing it. It was going to be playing in the background with his voice. He would not be singing it on screen. And he said, "But it's a nice song." He sang it to me over the phone, and that was, it used to be called Orally, and they changed it to Love Me Tender. He was pleased with the song. He was not pleased, however, when they decided to make him into a little stage performer in the movie.
It was just like Sinatra was. They found a niche in Hollywood, and he fit perfectly into that niche.
I think the main reason that he was so upset about singing was because he hated musicals. When we went to see The King and I in Biloxi, and Yul Brynner would turn to Deborah Kerr, and instead of saying, "I love you," he would start singing, and Elvis would say, "I can't stand it, I can't stand it, you know, let's get the hell out of here." And so we walked out on The King and I. But he hated musicals, he really did.
Colonel Parker, he wasn't really artistic-minded. He said all Hollywood is interested in is making money. And my boy, he called him Elvis, my boy, said, "My boy's making a lot of money. That's why we're still making these pictures, and we're not going to change until this format runs out."
Elvis co-starred with the beautiful starlet Deborah Paget.
Elvis thought Deborah Paget was one of the most gorgeous ladies that he'd ever met in his entire lifetime. He had a crush on her.
I think Elvis would have liked to gone out with Deborah Paget and captured her for his very own, but Deborah was off limits to Elvis, which I was grateful for.
she was seeing someone else at the time, so it never materialized.
Veteran actor Richard Egan also co-starred in the picture.
And I had just been crazy about Richard Egan, and he says, "How much do you love Richard Egan?" And I said, "Oh, about as much as you loved Deborah Paget."
Elvis met many people in Hollywood, including Nick Adams. The pushy young actor had impressed Elvis with his supporting role in the James Dean film Rebel Without a Cause. Nick introduced Elvis to James Dean's co-star, Natalie Wood.
He thought Natalie Wood was a fun girl. She was probably the hottest young female actress in Hollywood at the time, and I think that was more of an infatuation with Elvis.
2 weeks into the filming of Love Me Tender, Elvis made his first appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show. TV Guide marked the occasion by doing a cover story. June and her mother bought a television so they could watch. They were not alone. 82% of American households with a TV turned on that night saw the broadcast. Elvis was proclaimed the king of rock and roll. Love Me Tender wrapped in mid-October 1956. Elvis returned to Memphis, anxious to see his parents. June says he called and wired her money to fly up and stay with him. Back on Audubon Drive, June could see how much things have changed. Large groups of fans constantly lingered outside the Presleys' home, hoping to meet Elvis. He attracted huge crowds, even in Memphis, where he once felt less conspicuous. June remembers she and Elvis lay in bed talking for an hour. She asked him about stories in the press detailing romances with other women.
And when I questioned him about it, he said, "Don't believe anything you read in the paper. Everything you read about me is for publicity purposes."
Elvis longed for privacy and stayed home. After days of feeling trapped, he and June slipped out to a local Memphis theater to see newsreel footage of Elvis's Tupelo homecoming concert. When moviegoers realized Elvis was actually in the building, a riot broke out. Surrounded by police, he barely escaped the theater, with June close behind. Elvis told June that for the first time, he feared for his own life. Nick Adams arrived from Los Angeles. He spoke openly in front of June about Natalie Wood's interest in Elvis. In fact, his advice was that Elvis should be seen with other girls. June wondered why Elvis ever invited him. Elvis said that Nick more or less invited himself.
Elvis said he was a lonely little guy. Be nice to him, June. But Nick even made a couple of passes at me. You know, and I said, you better keep your hands. If you want your hands, you better keep them to yourself.
Elvis and June rode out to Mud Island to talk. It didn't seem like the same place it once was. Elvis was clearly distracted by all the new things going on in his life. June felt he loved her, but wondered if she could ever truly get him back.
Elvis wanted me to go and have a studio portrait made. And so I agreed to go have a studio portrait made. And when I got in there, the photographer said, did you want one smiling? And me and my silly wit, I said, well, I don't know, crying might be good, you know. And so we did, and premonition of some sort, I don't know, for me to send Elvis a picture of me crying.
Elvis entertained Natalie Wood in Memphis. June read about it in the paper. A few days later, Elvis called June. He told her that the Colonel had found out about her stay in Memphis and that they would have to cool it for a while.
I can't totally blame Colonel Parker for wrecking our relationship, because Elvis could have said, I'm not interested, I'm not going to do it.
On November the 19th, fans were going wild, buying tickets to see Love Me Tender. It was June's 19th birthday. The day passed with no word from Elvis. Elvis was dating a Las Vegas showgirl. She spent the weekend on Audubon Drive.
It didn't really make me jealous. It broke my heart. Elvis didn't need me. He had worlds, you know, the whole world full of girls of his choice. But no, I was not going to take a back seat to anyone.
The day after Christmas, the telephone rang. Elvis was calling to say happy holidays. June asked him why she hadn't heard from him.
I don't know that he tried to call because I had no answer machine on my phone back then. He claims that he did try to call.
June had made a New Year's resolution to forget about Elvis Presley. She knew that she wasn't cut out for his world. On March 18, 1957, June received a telegram from Elvis inviting her to meet him in New Orleans, where he would be changing trains. He was headed back to Memphis, about to move into Graceland. June decided to go to the station. She had something she needed to tell him.
It was really hard, and he kept saying, "You got to come home with me. I got a surprise for you. Mama can't wait to see you, and you're going to stay on the train with me." He was just ranting on, and I said, "I can't go with you. I'm engaged to be married." And I'm telling Elvis Presley that I have met someone and I'm engaged to be married, and I hope it hurts him, you know. I just blurted it out. I didn't know how else to tell him. And he just looked at me. So that's how we said goodbye. The news of Elvis's death just devastated me. And my husband of 20 years left work and came home to be with me because he heard on the radio. And he knew that I knew already. And he left and came home to be with me. And when he walked in the door, I'm trying to straighten up my face and put a cold rag on my eyes because I didn't want him to see how bad this had affected me. And he just put his arms around me and he said, "It's okay to cry, hon. I know how close you were to Elvis." Now, when I look back on it, it's like a different lifetime because it has been so long ago. But I was a little stubborn, a little hard-headed, and I was not going to allow anyone to break my heart. And so it's probably a combination of me, Elvis, and Colonel Parker, you know, that ended our relationship. But it was cherished memories.
June Juanico recalls her romance with Elvis in her memoir, Elvis in the Twilight of Memory. The title comes from a line in The Prophet, the book June gave Elvis when they were sweethearts. For more on Elvis Presley's family tree, visit genealogy.com. Sunday on Biography.
Footage for just $19.95 plus shipping and handling. To order, call 1-800-423-1212 or visit aetv.com.